Okay, keep it together. Got a lot to go.
I've been sleeping with the lights on, buried in regrets, breaking into sweats, naked as a falling.
It's Belle's Let's Talk Day. So let's talk. And no, I don't mean share a status with a hashtag, because that isn't talking. I mean let's really talk and let this mental health stigma end. Someone in my family is a teacher, and today on the playground, a 9th grader slit his wrists. Think about how old you were when you were in the 9th grade. This was a kid. He was still just a kid. They got him to the hospital in time, but that isn't enough. He should have never gotten to the point where he felt the need to scar his own beautiful body. I have depression. I don't take pills. I don't see a counselor or a therapist. I don't talk about it often, and even less on the days when I feel like it's swallowing me whole. No pill, no therapy session is a magic fix-all, cure-all. For some people, it helps, but for some, it's not enough, and it never will be. Talking may not be either, but it's worth a shot. I don't talk about my depression because I don't want to bring other people down. And I don't want to be met with, it'll be okays, or I know how you feels, or the classic, it could always be worse. Depression is different for everybody. It affects everyone differently. How you feel may not be how someone else feels. Your troubles do not diminish someone else's. And yeah, it could always be worse, but that doesn't mean the current situation suddenly seems better. I sit on my doorstep every night and smoke, headphones on, wrapped in a blanket, staring up at the sky and wondering how I ever got so low. I stay out here for an hour sometimes, and it's where I am now. I wonder how all the signs of my depression were missed at such a young age. I don't think it went unnoticed because I was afraid to talk about it. I think that because of the stigma, people were afraid to listen. So why is there a stigma? Is it because we don't ever want to think that anyone close to us could ever feel like that? Is it because we want to believe that we're enough? That if we try our very best to be the best person we can, if we're the best sister or brother or friend that we can be, that our loved ones will never have to feel like that? I have no doubt in my mind that everyone I've ever called family or a friend has tried their absolute hardest to be there for me, despite any mistakes we may have all made. But I still can't seem to make this feeling go away. No one's at fault for that. Sometimes all you can do is just work through the pain. I've contemplated posting a status like this for a while because I don't want to worry my parents. I don't want to upset anybody. Most of my family will be shocked in reading this, I think. But I can't stop thinking about that little boy and how I was doing just what he did when I was in the 9th grade. So if you have depression, I say, yeah, let's talk. But If you're sharing a status because it's all over your newsfeed, because this is the one day a year where you really stop and think about mental illness, then I'm asking you, don't talk. Just listen. Because maybe if more of us were willing to lend an ear, if more of us were willing to see the signs, maybe there wouldn't be such a stigma. And I know we all try our best, and I know that it's scary and painful to hear your best friend telling you how much she wants to end her own life. But if we listen, maybe we can catch mental health issues before it's too late to say, let's talk. What you just heard, I wrote last year on Belle's Let's Talk Day with intentions of posting it as a Facebook status. And I did for about all of 5 minutes. And then I decided that nobody would care. Nobody would bother reading it anyway. So I deleted it again. I still stand by every single word that I wrote, but I think there's something more to be said. What we refer to as stigma around mental illness is really just a perfect example of the saying, ignorance is bliss. It's not that we're ashamed to talk about it, it's that we feel like nobody's willing to listen. One of the most frustrating things that I hear people say about suicide is that it's selfish. They say that, so-and-so didn't fight hard enough. They didn't reach out, and instead they ended their own life. And so because of that, they were being selfish. Honestly, I agree that suicide is a very selfish thing to do, but I think that people fail to consider when you're in that mindset, it feels like it's anything but. I knew that I was depressed when I was 15 years old. I knew because my mother sat me down one day and told me that the doctor had expressed his concerns that I might be, and asked her if she thought I was. Before I could answer, she told me that she had told the doctor I wasn't depressed. I was sure then that the heavy, tight knot in my chest when I had to force a smile, the consuming darkness that kept me awake at night, the sad songs that I could get lost in for hours until I finally pushed myself over the edge enough to pick up a razor. I was sure then that that was depression, but I didn't think that was what she wanted to hear, so I lied. At 16 years old, I got myself a prescription for antidepressants. My parents didn't know, at least until my mother went to the pharmacy to pick up her own prescription, and they asked if she wanted to get mine too. Back then, I took my mother just being generally upset for being furious. I never got my prescription, and I was too scared to go back and get it. It wasn't until I was 20 that I made an attempt to get help again. On a night that I was so desperate to hurt myself, I had a moment of clarity, and called someone for a ride to the hospital, which would become the first of several nights the mental health system would fail me. For the first time since I was 16, I finally tried to get some help. I acknowledged that I needed help. I tried to admit myself on suicide watch. I spoke to a doctor, a psychologist, and a crisis prevention volunteer. I was told there was no room on the psych floor, but that they would try to find somewhere for me to spend the night. I wound up spending it cramped up in a chair until early morning when they sent me home. I understand that hospitals only have so many beds and so many doctors. What I don't understand is the amount of times that night I heard the phrase, "Well, you don't have any record of mental health issues." Here is the problem with that statement, at least from my perspective. Just because I don't have a record at the hospital doesn't mean I don't have a record. Just because, to your knowledge, I've never been prescribed antidepressants, that does not mean that I am not depressed. And just because I've never been hospitalized from a suicide attempt does not mean I've never attempted suicide. To point out my lack of record, and repeatedly so, as if to make light of my current situation, it is by far one of the worst things you can do to someone in the mindset that I was currently in. I'd spent years hating the mental health system, dismissing the thought of therapists or psychologists or even just doctors. So when I finally give it a shot, only to be dismissed because this was just the first time, it makes you feel like every awful thought, every terrible thing a person has ever said about you, that voice in the back of your head whispering, "Just do it," it makes you feel like all of them were right. I left the hospital that morning thinking, my life isn't even important enough for the doctors to care. The hospital had referred me to a psychologist. So a few weeks later, I went to see him. He said, and I quote, "I don't think you're really depressed." I got to a point where I was genuinely starting to second guess my own sanity. I couldn't walk down the street without considering stepping into the road. I remember getting ready for work one day and just kind of staring off into space, and I contemplated calling in sick to work so that I could stay home and cut myself. Nothing happened that day. There was nothing that set me off. It was just a passing thought. And that is absolutely terrifying to admit to myself, much less all of the internet. But I feel like it's important to mention, to give you, it gives you an idea of how fucked up I was. And still, somehow, I went under the radar. A while after that, I decided, clearly, subconsciously, I don't really want to die. So I go to the doctor to try and get some antidepressants. I don't live with my parents anymore. There's no reason for me not to try. My doctor recommended I try God, Christianity. He asked me what my religious beliefs were, and I told him, and he essentially told me that my beliefs were wrong and would only lead me further into depression. So he wrote down some spiritual YouTubers to look up and told me to make an appointment in 2 weeks' time. I didn't. April 17th, 2017. I tried to commit suicide that day. I feel like I have to go into some detail with this, so I'm just gonna give you guys a fair warning. You know, if you don't think it's something you can handle hearing, click off now. I attempted suicide. I really tried this time. And then my stupid voice of reason tells me to pick up the phone and call a friend. So she and another friend rush to my apartment and get me to the hospital in time. Only one of them can come in the room with me, so I pick friend A because I know that friend B is good in high pressure situations. I know that friend B will be okay in a waiting room by herself, as opposed to friend A, who would be pacing frantically and worrying, not knowing what was going on. I don't think I've ever told friend A that. She probably wonders why I picked her to watch me almost die. The nurses and doctors hook me up to an EKG. They run blood tests and give me an IV full of something. They barely say a word to me or my scared friend, except for when the doctor looks at my chart, sees how many antidepressants I took, and says, "Wow, that's a lot. That's an awful lot." I don't imagine that made my friend feel much better. It's been hours now, so my friend leaves, and a nurse is asked to stay by my side and keep an eye on me. My vitals were stable at this point, so I was coherent enough that we could have a conversation. For the first time in all the hours that I'd been there, someone finally asked me why. She finally asked me why. I don't know if doctors and nurses are allowed to ask questions like that, but I do know that night she was the only person that was willing to listen. So the doctor comes over. He tells me I have two choices. I can agree to go to the psychiatric hospital peacefully, or he can drag me there kicking and screaming. I agreed to go. A different nurse is asked to accompany me in the taxi. She doesn't say a word. She doesn't even look at me. So now I'm in the psychiatric hospital, and I sit for hours in a waiting room, listening to some woman try to seduce the guy sitting next to her. Finally, I'm called into a private room where I speak to a psychologist. He asks me what I want to happen. By this point, I'm drained. It's been hours. I regret ever calling my friend. I regret not closing my eyes and letting myself drift into the darkness. I just want to go home and follow through. So I tell him I want to go home. He promptly agrees and tells me he thinks people heal better outside of the hospital. So, after our 5-minute conversation, the hospital sends me home. In a cab, in the middle of the night, alone. If there wasn't someone at my apartment when I got there, I don't know that I would be here making this video right now. I'm not the only one this has happened to. There are countless others. I'll put some of them in the description. I hate seeing these stories. You know, nobody really wants to die. You just get to a point where you feel like that's your only option. And I can't help but wonder how many people died because the hospital turned them away. How many people slipped through the cracks while their name was sitting on a waiting list somewhere. January 31st, 2018. It spells infamous Let's Talk Day. I have made it to 22 years old, and I did it without the help of drugs or psychologists or therapists, or the help of the mental health system. It took a suicide attempt for me to turn my life around. It took traumatizing my friend into thinking she was about to watch me die. And now I'm doing the best that I have in a long time. And I can honestly say I think a big reason for that is because I started this YouTube channel. We're living in a world where a YouTube channel can help someone more than the mental health system. We care when someone commits suicide, but we don't care enough when we still have a chance to save them. We need to stop looking at suicide and depression like it's an inconvenient problem and start treating it like the epidemic that it is. The lack of care in our mental health system, that's the inconvenient problem. It spells Let's Talk Day, so let's talk about that. I know that not everybody is going to agree with every word that I said. And I also know that this isn't the case with mental health systems everywhere. I'm sure the mental health system has saved many lives, but I also believe that they've missed many signs, and as a result, lives were lost too soon, and that could have been prevented. I'll be honest, I don't have all the answers. I'm just drawing attention to the problem. I don't have a solution for this, but I need to believe that someone out there does, because if this is the best we can do, then our best isn't good enough. I want to remind all of my roses that your mental health matters every day, not just today. You matter every day, not just today. As always, my email is in the description. if you want to reach out. If it's an emergency, please call the number that's on the bottom of the screen. You guys are important to me. And I know that sounds weird because I'm just a random girl on the internet and we've never met, but you guys are important to me. Today is a hard day for some of us. For others, you know, every day can be a hard day. So remember to love each other and be kind and caring. Talk, but also remember to listen. And that's it for this video, roses. I love you. I'll see you guys sometime next week.